You're watching This Week in Louisiana Politics with Fred Childers.
Good Sunday morning to you. I'm Fred Childers. Thanks for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics on your local election headquarters. Well, Governor John Bel Edwards is voicing full confidence in Louisiana's health secretary. This comes after a familiar critic demanded that she quit. It was a call that rekindled a long-standing argument, as Capitol correspondent Harrison Golden explains.
Dr. Gee needs to resign. She just p***ed away $61 to $85 million of taxpayer money.
Senator John Kennedy noting the state audit out this week showing Louisiana may have misspent up to $85 million on Medicaid recipients who at some point in their coverage did not qualify for the program.
It's an insult. A Great Dane-sized whiz down the leg of every taxpayer in Louisiana and America.
But the governor's office is firing back, calling Kennedy's remarks a baseless soundbite brought about by having too much free time in Washington. The Edwards team adding that under a new automated system, LDH will increase income verification checks fourfold, which they claim will address the long-term problem described in the audit.
Obviously, the benefit is first and foremost to our taxpayers to make sure that we're making efficient use of public dollars. Secondly, we want to make sure that the dollars we have available are really targeted to those who deserve the benefits, and so that's really the emphasis for us.
But the Republican senator says he doesn't buy it.
Now, I know that Dr. Gee has said she'll do better. That's what she always says. That's not good enough anymore.
Kennedy says he's authoring federal legislation mandating stricter screening of Medicaid eligibility. But the governor's office questions how long the senator wants to stay on Capitol Hill, inferring that he's angling to challenge Edwards for the mansion next year. In the meantime, the governor's spokesman Richard Carbo says the junior senator would, quote, be doing our country and state a great service by focusing on the job he ran for 3 times, rather than meddling into issues he knows nothing about.
This has nothing to do with running for governor.
Kennedy says he plans to stay mum on his ambitions until December 1st. For your local election headquarters, I'm Harrison Golden.
Well, more than 480,000 Louisianans are enrolled in Medicaid through expansion. Kennedy maintained that despite his criticism, Louisiana should not divest from the federally backed program. While rumors swirl over Senator Kennedy's run for governor, another Louisiana Republican has put his own speculation to rest. Attorney General Jeff Landry said this week he will not challenge John Bel Edwards next year. Landry posted on Facebook he will seek a second term as Attorney General. This comes a few months after Landry said he would consider the challenge. You can read his full post on our website. Just head to brproud.com. Louisiana Republican Congressman Steve Scalise has been elected as the House of Representatives Minority Whip. When Republicans had control of the House, Congressman Scalise had served as the Majority Whip. Kevin McCarthy of California was elected the new House GOP leader today, after a vote between him and Jim Jordan of Ohio. Now, McCarthy promises a battle if Democrats focus primarily on investigating the Trump administration and possibly moving to impeach. Back here in Louisiana, Justin DeWitt claims his campaign cost him his day job. This week, he filed a formal complaint saying his former employer violated a state code that protects employees eyeing political office. He spoke one-on-one with our Harrison Golden, who broke the story this past week.
That came as a shock. I could see that the campaign obviously was an issue.
Less than 2 days after losing a U.S. House seat to incumbent Garrett Graves, Justin DeWitt got a phone call from his boss.
And the first day I returned back, 36 hours after the election is over, I'm no longer employed.
DeWitt spent 4 years at SJB Group, a land surveying firm in Baton Rouge. He says with management's permission, he took 8 days off to campaign. Then Thursday came the layoff, he says without warning and effective immediately.
The only thing they told me that the reason this was happening is that their workload, they're tightening their belts, reducing crews, and that my work performance has been low this year.
But DeWitt argues company claims of downsizing don't add up, claiming he's been the only layoff, a month after the firm invested in a new truck and gave bonuses to workers.
My performance, if it was so low, then why did I get a bonus? Why did I get a raise?
The Democrat DeWitt says his sudden termination is about politics, which he says he's never discussed at work.
Maybe I'm a liability, or maybe they just have bad timing of trying to lay someone off and not giving a real justification.
SJB President Wilfred Barry in a statement telling us the company does not comment on staff departures. Meanwhile, DeWitt says his story is all too common, especially among lower-profile candidates who often juggle their jobs with the campaign trail.
Anyone running for office in the state of Louisiana or across the country, if you're not already wealthy or rich or heads of corporations or someone in the power already, then my advice to them would be to prepare for a long and bumpy road.
Yet even as DeWitt now seeks a day job, he says a job in public office is still worth the wear. In Baton Rouge for your local election headquarters, I'm Harrison Golden.
DeWitt now says he is eyeing a run for the state legislature in the coming years. Well, the governor and the Louisiana Secretary of State in a war of words over a vote, one cast by someone who had been convicted of a felony. The Secretary of State is now investigating, and that prompted Governor John Bel Edwards to accuse him of having a lack of knowledge regarding voting rights in the state. Now, in a letter from the governor addressed to Secretary of State Kyle Ardoin, he criticizes Ardoin for investigating former New Roads Mayor Robert Meyer related to his voting in the midterms. Ardoin was suspicious that Meyer may have illegally cast his ballot as a felon and was allowed to do so because he was left off of a list thanks to his connections in state government. Now, Meyer had been convicted of malfeasance in office and he had resigned. Edwards, however, points out that the Louisiana law prohibiting felons from voting doesn't apply to Meyer since his charge was dismissed in July after he completed probation. Ardoin's office responded with a statement saying, in part, the governor's lengthy, sarcastic response is nothing more than an attempt to sidestep a potentially troubling issue and a failure to address any of our specific concerns. For his full statement, just head to our website, brproud.com. By the way, U.S. Senator John Kennedy announced his support for Ardoin, saying he's correct for raising those questions. Coming up, you'll hear directly from the man that letter was sent to. Secretary of State Kyle Ardoin will talk about his dust-up with the governor and his campaign as he heads into a runoff election with his Democratic challenger Gwen Collins Greenup. That's next on your local election headquarters.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to This Week in Louisiana Politics. As you can see, I'm joined by Secretary of State Kyle Ardoin. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Well, we're going to talk about your campaign a little bit because you just won a spot in the runoff election for December 8th. Not only are you the Secretary of State, you're also a candidate to fill that office as well. December 8th, you will head into a runoff with Democrat Gwen Collins Greenup. So what's in store for your campaign in the coming weeks?
Just continuing to get our message out to the voters that our experience is beyond our opponents. We're focused on the job and making certain that the elections are pulled off. Opposite of what Broward County is going through. We certainly have a lot better procedures in place and are confident in our procedures and consistent. And so I'm very pleased with the election, the way it came out, not just obviously the outcome for me, but the outcome all across the state.
Yeah, now it was a contentious race. A couple of your opponents came at you for various things, criticized you. Do you expect the same kind of race out of Greenup?
I don't, and hopefully we'll just talk about the issues, her perspective on the issues, my perspective on the issues, and go from there and let the voters make a choice. It was unfortunate that there was such acrimonious attitude in the election, but of course that's politics. I've got thick skin. Obviously the voters accepted our positive message and our record, and so I'm pleased with that.
Yeah. Speaking of controversy, we're going to switch gears here a little bit. There's a controversy brewing between you and Governor John Bel Edwards, and this is over Robert Meyer, former mayor of New Roads. As you know, he was convicted of a crime. He then resigned as mayor, and we're told that he voted in this last election. Your office has looked into this, and it's your position that he may have illegally done so. Now, since then, you and the governor have traded some sort of terse letters. Governor Edwards has accused you of not knowing the state's voting rights laws. Why is that?
Well, I'm not sure that he realizes what the voting rights laws are. If you look at Title 18, 171, it requires the Department of Corrections to report to my office all felons, irregardless of whether they're in suspension or not. The fact is that did not occur in this case. All we're saying is we need to have the legislative auditor come in and look at the process that the Department of Corrections is following and make sure it abides by law. If there's one, there must be others. And if there are, then they are impeding upon the rights of other law-abiding citizens and their right to vote. Irregardless, if he had the right to vote, that's great. Follow the proper procedures. That's all we're asking for.
Okay, now, so it's been kind of insinuated that Meyer may have been able to vote, or he was left off of a list that should have been supplied to your office.
That is correct. We get a monthly list from the Department of Corrections of all felons. Well, we thought it was all felons. Maybe it's not. And that's why we've asked the legislative auditor to look into it, because Robert Myers was left off the list. If he was left off the list, how many others are left off the list? And if they have a reason for leaving off the list, then they need to look at 18:171 and decide there are no exceptions about being left off the list.
Okay.
And all we're asking is that they follow the proper procedures.
Right, and speaking of the articles, Governor Edwards has also cited an article, and I'll read to you just a part of this letter that he sent back to you. It said, quote, "If your initial investigation had included a review of Mr. Meyer's conviction, you would have known that he was sentenced under Article 893 and successfully completed the conditions of his probation in July of 2018. This is your point." And he goes on to say, "And hopefully you would not have carelessly released Mr. Meyer's name as an individual who illegally cast his ballot." So this is your point. You're saying that this article that he cites doesn't even apply.
Doesn't apply to the election code for certain. The Department of Corrections has to supply us a list quarterly, but they've been doing it monthly electronically, of all felons. The reality is that there may be a conflict in law, but if there is, then we need to have the legislative auditor check this out. If this individual had the right to vote, that's fine. But why did he never show up on the list from January of 2018?
That's your main point.
That is my main point. He should have shown up on the list, like any other felon shows up on the list.
Right. You've since answered this letter, and you commented about it. The last graph of this, actually, Governor Edwards says, "In the future, I would recommend that your office fully review allegations of illegal voting carefully before releasing letters to the media that suggest any wrongdoing by Louisianans." You described this letter as lengthy and sarcastic. Do you feel like Governor Edwards is getting personal with this?
I think it's unfortunate that he chose to take the path that he did with the tone of this letter. I believe that my letter was pretty factual and asking him to look at the investigation with regards to his Department of Corrections. I didn't attack him personally, but the fact of the matter is, if he wants to make this a campaign issue and he's going to side with felons, well, that's his job. I'm going to side with an election filled with integrity and make certain that those who have the rights to vote, vote, and those who don't.
Fair enough. All right. Well, we want you to step back in your Secretary of State's role. During the midterm election, we saw some really good turnout. I believe it was upwards of 49%. What's your reaction to that?
I was very excited about it. I think it was the result of the nationalization of the midterm elections. I think a lot of voters in Louisiana wanted to come out and support President Trump, knowing that possibly, you know, all their Republican congressional members would be reelected, and they did so. And certainly, I look forward to the next round. Everyone needs to get out and vote. I don't want a much lower turnout, but again, people have to choose to get out and vote, and I hope they will do so.
All right, thank you so much. By the way, just for the viewers to know, we have invited Secretary Ardoin's challenger, the Democratic challenger, Gwen Collins Greenup, to come onto the show. We haven't heard from her yet, but that invitation is open. We hope she takes us up on that. We'd like for our viewers to hear from her as well. Thank you, Secretary Ardoin. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Fred. Appreciate you.
All right. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to This Week in Louisiana Politics. Joining us on the show is John Kuvian with JMC Analytics and Polling. Thanks for coming on, John.
Good to be here today.
Well, we can breathe a sigh of relief now that the midterm elections are over, at least until the December runoff. But in the meantime, let's talk about the road that led up to the Democrats picking up at least 34 House seats and taking control of the U.S. House. Is it fair to say we didn't necessarily see a blue wave, but we saw a realignment?
To me, I see the two as one and the same.
Okay.
Because basically what happened last Tuesday night was that things that were already in the works politically, starting with the 2016 elections, basically got accelerated last Tuesday night. So really, however you want to describe it, it was an undeniably bad night for the Republicans, the worst I've seen since the Watergate midterm election of 1974.
Wow. Within your research, you noted that there were two things happening over the past few years. When we saw President Trump win in 2016, that was sort of a realignment that was in favor of the Republicans. But there was another shift going on under the surface, correct?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So what was happening is that while Donald Trump pierced the infamous blue wall by doing very well amongst labor and ethnic voters, primarily in the Midwest, what was also happening at the same time, but was not as noticed, was that Democrats were picking up steam in white-collar suburban areas in places like Atlanta and Dallas and Houston and Phoenix. That did not directly cost the Republicans anything in 2016, but what ended up happening was that voters this year who voted for Hillary Clinton or Gary Johnson in those same areas all of a sudden voted for a Democratic congressman. So that is the less noticed aspect of the realignment that occurred starting in 2016.
So the seed was planted, the Republicans just didn't see it growing beneath the surface.
Correct. They only focused on one side of the equation. The first thing that they should have immediately noticed was that you had approximately 40 Republicans sitting in districts where Donald Trump got less than 50% of the vote. So in other words, your first priority became reaching across the aisle to get those Gary Johnson voters or Republicans who voted for Hillary Clinton if you wanted to survive politically. Well, they didn't, and they lost.
Mm-hmm. Now, Republicans maintained control of the Senate. You say there's good reason for that.
So what had happened, even though the results are seemingly contradictory between the House and the Senate elections, what is important to appreciate is that in the House you have all 435 seats up every 2 years. In the Senate, 1/3 of the Senate was up for re-election every 2 years. In this case, it was 35 seats. More specifically, of those 35, 26 were Democrats and 9 Republicans. So the playing field was tilted heavily against the Democrats this year, particularly since in 10 of those 26 Democratic-held seats, Donald Trump carried those states. So basically the Democrats, it was extremely unlikely that they were going to carry the Senate, considering that the odds were stacked against them. They didn't do half bad.
Yeah, they had an uphill battle from the start. We've heard both parties claim victory in the midterm elections, naturally.
Yes.
That's not surprising. In fact, Senator John Kennedy, I think he's even kind of downplayed what we've heard of this blue wave. He says he calls it a blue trickle. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, with all due respect to Senator Kennedy, I like to think that he was just playing along with the partisan spin of the day coming out of Washington, D.C., because if he truly believes that that in fact was a trickle, that's very bad news for the Republicans, and I think that he's getting bad political advice, because come 2020, there'll be 34 more senators up for election. 22 of those 34 are Republican this time. So in other words, the tables are tilted more against the Republicans next time than they were this time. And I can immediately think of 5 Republican senators who are vulnerable. So in other words, it's not going to get any easier from here on out. So I would respectfully disagree with the characterization of blue trickle.
And that brings me to my next question. What should Republicans have learned from this last election?
So the lesson Republicans need to learn is this, and it needs to be repeated ad infinitum. 46% of the national popular vote is not an electoral mandate to govern. If you don't follow that advice, you will get defeated. Simple as that.
Should they gear themselves more towards the independent vote?
Yes.
Because we're seeing more and more people leave Republican and Democratic parties as well and go independent, correct?
Well, what's happening is that the independents who've always been around, this year they swung heavily Democratic. Republicans would be wise to pay attention to that voter bloc because they still are the tiebreaker, whether they want to admit that or not.
They may need to revamp the message, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, all right, great research. Thank you, John, appreciate it.
Yes.
Stay with us, we'll be right back.
This is your local election headquarters.
Welcome back to This Week in Louisiana Politics. This Week in Louisiana Politics is all about giving you a preview of what you can expect in the coming week. Taking a look at the schedule this week, on Monday, the Press Club of Baton Rouge will hear about an organization that strives to protect the state's seafood industry from major hurricanes. That's an important job. Robert Twilley, director of Louisiana Sea Grant, will address the Press Club. He'll talk about the work they do and the 50th anniversary of that organization. Thank you for joining us for This Week in Louisiana Politics. I'm Fred Childers. I'll see you next Sunday right here on your local election headquarters.